Good evening from New York. Speak softly and carry a big stick, the African proverb that Republican President Teddy Roosevelt popularized in this country and in this world. A quotation that some on the right are so fond of citing, about which they often seem to remember only half. The big stick half. Our fifth story on the countdown tonight, on the final leg of his European tour. The president putting the speak softly part of U.S. foreign policy back into the equation by reaching out to the Muslim world and by doing more about North Korea than the nothing the Bush administration had been doing. We begin in Ankara in Turkey, day 8 of Obama's overseas charm offensive. The president choosing the East-West divide in a speech to the Turkish legislature to send his message.
I've been to the G20 summit in London, the NATO summit in Strasbourg, and the European Union summit in Prague. Some people have asked me if I chose to continue my travels to Ankara and Istanbul to send a message to the world. And my answer is simple. Evet, yes.
The president with more than one message. Middle East peace, elevating Turkey into the European Union. Chief among his messages, however, an overture to the hearts and minds of the Muslim world, as opposed to, say, dropping the word crusade on them and threatening them and invading them.
So let me say this as clearly as I can. The United States is not and will never be at war with Islam. I also want to be clear that America's relationship with the Muslim community, the Muslim world, cannot and will not just be based upon opposition to terrorism. We seek broader engagement based on mutual interest and mutual respect. We will listen carefully, we will bridge misunderstandings, and we will seek common ground. We will be respectful even when we do not agree. We will convey our deep appreciation for the Islamic faith, which has done so much over the centuries to shape the world, including in my own country. The United States has been enriched by Muslim Americans.
Most Americans backing the president's desire to seek a new way forward with the Muslim world, despite the fact that nearly half in this country still hold unfavorable views of the religion. 81% of those surveyed in the Washington Post poll believing it is important for the U.S. to improve relations with Muslim nations. President Obama stressing that cultural understanding improved by all media, even his beloved sport, roundball.
And as a basketball fan, I've even noticed that Hedo Turkoglu and Mehmet Okur have got some pretty good basketball games.
And then there is the problem of North Korea. The president's visit to Prague over the weekend set against the backdrop of a long-range missile launch by Kim Jong-il. The North Koreans claiming the three-stage missile was fired to put a communications satellite into space, but U.S. officials countering. This was actually to test a long-range ballistic missile that could ultimately hit the United States, perhaps with a nuclear weapon. The test launch coming barely 6 hours before Mr. Obama was to deliver a speech on nuclear disarmament.
North Korea broke the rules once again by testing a rocket that could be used for long-range missiles. This provocation underscores the need for action, not just this afternoon at the UN Security Council, but in our determination to prevent the spread of these weapons. Rules must be binding. Violations must be punished. Words must mean something. The world must stand together to prevent the spread of these weapons. Now is the time for a strong international response.
Time now to call in our own Jonathan Alter, senior editor at Newsweek magazine. John, good evening.
Hi, Keith.
It seemed so radical to hear an American president say the United States is not and can't be at war with Islam. Is that a clarification that needed to be made, and is there any way to gauge how much it needed to be made?
It absolutely had to be made. This was a huge and extremely important do-over for the United States in the Muslim world. You know, under Bill Clinton, we had pretty good relations in that part of the world. I think President Bush, after 9/11, wanted to reach out to more moderate Muslims, but in pretty much everything he said, he hurt himself in that effort. So we had a good versus evil, us versus them kind of foreign policy, where when you throw in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo and the war in Iraq, it's understandable why the Muslim world would get this message that the United States did not wish them well. So it was extremely important that President Obama make this crystal clear as he did this week.
Should it have been crystal clear to this nation for the last 8 years that the U.S. was not going to succeed at containing the nuclear threat in Iran without allies in the Muslim world rather than people just who might be, if we're mean enough to them, scared of us? Yeah,
ultimatums generally don't work. What works best is actually regional diplomacy. Even though I personally favor much closer relations between the United States and Iran, because, as Obama said during the campaign, you have to talk to your enemies. Before you get to that, before you get to U.S.-Iranian relations, you have to create a structure of peace and arms control in the region, in that part of the world. Otherwise, you will have not just Iranian nukes, but an arms race throughout that area with perhaps Egypt and others getting nuclear weapons. That would be a true disaster for the world.
John, we heard the president also say today that many Americans have Muslims in their families. They've lived in a Muslim-majority country, perhaps, and that he knew about this because he happened to be one of them. The messenger today, was the messenger as important as the message?
Yes, and this is something that Barack Obama has used very effectively going back to the campaign, when he would use his life story to connect to Americans. Now he's using his life story, admittedly part of that story that he didn't talk too much about during the campaign, to connect to Muslims and people in other parts of the world. And it's extremely effective when he does this. It establishes a connection. Now, he knows that it's not everything. He said in Strasbourg that just because my name is Barack Hussein Obama doesn't mean everything's going to be okay. You know, he knows that the personal connection only takes him so far, but it's a start.
Well, to be fair, regarding the campaign, the Republicans did talk about it enough for two parties. So
that's right.
This is now complete. 8 days in Europe. It has been the charm offensive, or at least the charm tour. It is now complete. Is there a way to grade this at this point? Do we know the impact and what it was worth?
Yeah, you have to give him very high marks for this trip. Look, there were a couple things that didn't go so well. He wanted the Europeans to take part in stimulus more than they did, the Germans in particular, fearing inflation like they had in the 20s, where they took wheelbarrows of cash. They didn't want to get into the stimulus game. That's unfortunate. So that was a setback. But pretty much everything else about the trip went extraordinarily well. They reset relations with the Russians, big advances on getting going again with arms control, improved relations with Turkey, obviously, huge charm offensive in Europe to tamp down some of the anti-Americanism that's been a real problem there. Even did some diplomatic work in stopping a little mini feud between China and France, and one between Denmark and Turkey. So this is a lot that he got done in a relatively short period of time. They also committed $1 trillion to the International Monetary Fund. Pretty good job for a week's work.
Jonathan Alter of MSNBC and Newsweek. As always, sir, great job for us.
Thanks, Keith.